I am joined by Suwilo Namfukwe, the founder and managing consultant of Elevate. Oh my gosh, I can't do it. I literally can't do it. I wrote Elevate and I still see Elevate. I don't really know what happened, but I didn't want to jinx it. No, I think you got it. You don't even have to start again. Just do it one more time. You got it. Elevate. Oh my word. Okay, that is hilarious. Do I not know how to read English? What's going on, guys? I'm struggling. Okay.
Welcome to Shameless. Here we explore the transformative power of courage and action.
Okay. Hi, my name is Nono, and welcome to Shameless, a podcast brought to you by Transformation Leader. If you're one of our T4 learners, we have something amazing in store for you today. I am joined by Suwilo Namfukwe, the founder and managing consultant of Elevate, a wellness solution and holistic wellness service provider with its head offices in Lusaka, Zambia. Suwilo is a clinical psychotherapist based in Zambia and is licensed in both Zambia and the United States of America. She has been providing individuals, corporates, and educational institutions with holistic wellness support for over 15 years and is passionate about helping individuals and communities to improve their overall well-being. She's also a certified workplace wellness specialist and program manager through the National Wellness Institute and is certified in ACT and EMDR, therapist specializing in working with trauma and addiction. Suwilo, thank you and welcome.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me today, Nono.
I am very happy that you're pretending that I did that the first time.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anything for the listeners/viewers.
Amazing. All right. So I just wanted to actually dive deep first, and then as we go along, maybe we'll get a little lighter. So you specialize in trauma, and I just wanted you to explain to us, what is trauma? Can you define trauma for us?
Yeah, sure. So I guess what I'll do is I'll start by talking about what most people think about when they think about trauma. So when they hear trauma. So a lot of the times when people hear the word trauma, they think about really significant things that happen to a person in their life. So things like being in a horrible car accident or a near-death experience or horrible abuse. And they'll think, okay, those things would be traumatic and those things would leave a scar on people's lives and might result in like PTSD. And that's not to say that those things aren't traumatic and can't be traumatic. But one of the things that people oftentimes don't realize is that trauma is not so much about what happens to you, as much as it is how you respond to it and how it affects you in the long term. So trauma can be anything then, depending on the person, depending on the individual, depending on how things affect or impact them. People can be traumatized by lots of different things. So sometimes in therapy, we refer to this as like big T trauma versus little t trauma. And the big T trauma would be the stuff which everyone would be like, yeah, that person went through that. It's understandable that they'll be traumatized. But the little T trauma is the stuff that happens to people that they might even themselves think, why is this affecting me so much? Why am I bothered by this? Why am I bothered by the fact that I was bullied by this one guy in 9th grade one time? Like, why do I still think about it? Why do I still have nightmares about it? It's not that big of a deal. I should move on from it. But the reality is that trauma is any experience that we have that has a long-lasting imprint on our psyche, on our psychological well-being, and our ability to be able to do life optimally and do life at the very best that we can. So yeah, it really could be anything depending on the individual and their personal response to the situation.
So how does trauma then affect someone's personality? And does it mean that your past personality can basically change due to the fact that you've had a big T trauma versus a little T trauma?
And so again, when we use that in psychology, it's usually just to help people understand that, hey, you might not realize that this particular thing has impacted you in the same way that something major like earthquake or a natural disaster would impact another person. And that's why we call it the little t trauma. So, but they're all the same. So the impact of trauma on a person who then has this long lasting effect and that's a part of their lives is the same. So they'll have similar symptoms. Their life will be affected in a similar way because trauma is and trauma does what trauma does. So the impact of it would be the same, right? As far as personality goes, it can have a huge impact on how you do life and how you see the world and how you see yourself. And so a lot of the times when it comes to how it might impact our personality, it might mean that we are no longer the person that we, I guess, ultimately would be or could be. So we might see ourselves through a distorted lens. So the lens through which we now view ourselves, see ourselves, understand ourselves might be distorted by this trauma. So I might now believe, because of that kid that, bullied me when I was in ninth grade, I might now believe as an adult, a well-adjusted, functioning, as well as you can be with carrying the burden of trauma, I might now start believing things about myself that aren't true. So I might believe that, oh, no one likes me, everyone thinks I'm weird, and therefore I live that out. So I end up becoming a hermit, not wanting to socialize. And then in some ways, you could say that my personality has become that, right, as a result of the trauma. But had I not experienced that, I might be a socialite and really just love spending time with people and be confident in a room and, own the spaces that I'm in. So that particular traumatic event can definitely have an impact on how I do life and how I live out who I am. And so I guess in that sense, yeah, it can affect your personality. This might be jumping ahead a little bit, but it also then, what then that means is it's not necessarily you, a healthy version of you. When we are living with trauma, we're not a healthy version of ourselves. And so everything that we're doing is literally the unwell version of us. And so it's hard for me then to say that this is now my personality. I have become this person as a result of the trauma. Rather, the trauma is making me behave or live out in this particular way. And once that is dealt with, once I heal, the real authentic me will come out and be able to flourish and be everything that it's meant to be. So yeah, that's how I would explain that. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. So then I think that that's super interesting because you're saying that trauma basically means that we're not our well selves. We're not, we're hangry, basically. When you're hungry, you don't act as amazing as maybe you would if you were happy, not stressed. But then, so this month we've been really focusing on mindset and talking about growth mindset, proactive mindsets, etc. Where does trauma fit into that context of how you view yourself in life? And then how do you even understand that, wow, I'm impacted by this. This is a traumatic experience. And that's why maybe I'm not a great leader. Maybe I'm not the best person or best version of myself for the people around me. And I'm not serving them as best as I could. How can we identify that?
Oh man, such a good question. And I love that analogy of yours, the hangry. When you are hungry, you are not the best version of yourself. I think we all know that from experience. And absolutely, when it comes to trauma being an active part of when we are living with trauma, we are not the best version of ourselves. And one of the most interesting things that people oftentimes aren't even aware of is that when you're living with trauma, it affects your brain. So it is a brain thing that happens to you, as well as a psychological, emotional thing that happens to you, right? Because we're whole beings. Everything is connected, And people who are living with trauma actually have a lower level of a lower ability to learn. than people who aren't living with trauma. So if
You need
you're
to say that again and slowly, because that is wild.
yes, it is insane. Yes, your ability to actually learn is lowered if you're living with trauma. And think of it this way, because of what trauma does to us in the brain and how it activates our stress response, our body is constantly in that hypervigilant state when we're living with trauma. So it's in that state of something is going to happen to me. And again, even if this is being triggered by a very small t trauma, the response is still the same. There's a threat out there that I need to be mindful of. So if we're existing in there's a threat mode, how like how feasible is it going to be for us to look around at the world around us and absorb all the stuff, all the information, be critical thinkers? No, we're hyper vigilant about the fact that we need to protect ourselves from this threat that exists. And this isn't necessarily even a conscious thought. It's not a conscious way of thinking, but it is how our brain and our mind is operating on our behalf to protect us from the perceived threat of whatever triggers the traumatic response within us. So we're just not going to be learning as well as we can. So if we're talking about a growth mindset, oh my gosh, you might be reiterating this to groups of people. Like, this is how you grow. This is how you expand your worldview, your way of thinking. This is how you think critically, and they can hear it. But being able to properly absorb and assimilate it, which is learning, right? Is limited and is hindered by the fact that they have this automatic kind of siren that's going off in their brain constantly saying that might be good, but self-preservation, protect yourself. And so their ability to even learn and absorb is not as effective as it would be if they were not living the trauma.
Wow, that is, I have like 1,000 questions, but we do have the whole week to have this conversation. I think the first question that comes to mind, because, you know, we are trying to develop transformation leaders across the continent. So if you are working in a team, how do you identify that a person in your team might be someone who is traumatized by someone, and then how do you get the best out of them? Because you still need to have an output. You're usually in a for-profit organization setting or or whatever type of organization, but you're working towards a goal. So how can we navigate that as leaders?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, it's important for leaders to be trauma informed. So they need to have trauma informed mindset in how they're approaching leadership. So are you aware of some of the telltale signs that someone might be living with trauma? Someone might be, that might be someone's reality. So I'll give an example. There was a place I worked at one point, and there was one of the people on my team who was just constantly negative and constantly critical and just always finding fault, and there was always something wrong with this particular person. And I think because of my background, because I'm a psychologist, I was like, something's not okay with this person, because it is not normal for a human being to exist with that much negativity and criticism within them. And so something deeper must be going on here. And the reality is, Nono, most of us have had some kind of traumatic experience at some point and have our trauma demons that we have to work through and we have to navigate. So when it comes to leadership and how you do that, understand what trauma is and understand how it can show up in your people. So things like again, being constantly critical, things like fighting for your position, come hell or high water. It's like, I'm holding on to my position because I feel like if I lose this, I lose something substantial. So these are people who feel threatened by anything around them. Someone on the team is stronger at analytics than they are, and they feel threatened by that. Someone else is stronger at being a people person, and they feel threatened by that. Everything feels like a threat to them. Again, that should be a sign that maybe there might be some trauma going on here. This person might be dealing with a little bit more than just they can't be happy for someone, or they can't, just, be a cheerleader or a team player. There might be more going on. Even things like over politicizing in the workplace. So always trying to find that person who you can cozy up to make sure that you're in good books. And I'm going to talk about my teammates and my colleagues, and say horrible things about other people to make them look bad, so that I'm constantly looking like I'm in a good light with all of these people. That can also be a sign of trauma. And again, it's that need that the person feels to be recognized and be okay with the people who are in power, because otherwise it might result in something that might be devastating to them. So as a leader, just understanding, even when you start to see this in your team, someone who is behaving in these ways, is to understand and then to approach with safety. I like to call it safety, because it's not always gentle. Well, it's not always nice. Like, it may not always be like, oh, I'm gonna like hold you in my bosom and say nice things to you, because that's not the best thing to help someone grow. But being mindful of what the person has experienced, being compassionate and empathetic to what they've experienced, but also helping them get the help that they need to be able to navigate the trauma that they might be living with. And so that's why I say it may not always be nice, it may not always be comfortable. It may be very uncomfortable conversations then that need to be had as a leader with your team if you think that there might be something going on there that might be linked to or connected to trauma.
I think that, you make a very good point around identifying that your team might have trauma and then trying to get them to get help.
Yeah.
I think also in the context of Africa, maybe let me speak more specifically to Southern Africa, that's a really big ask. And I don't know how you navigate that conversation, because some people, like, are you saying I'm crazy now? Like, I think that it kind of goes way to the extreme. It's like, no, I just think you need to talk to someone. That's all. Like, it doesn't seem or feel like it's such a big request, but I think that can be a big request. Do you have any advice around how someone might navigate that conversation?
And so again, I think because context is everything, and the person sitting in front of you is a unique individual that cannot fit, neatly into a box of, okay, have I said this? Have I said this? Have I said that? But I think the general disposition of compassion and empathy, when people know that you actually care, it makes a world of a difference when you need to say or have those hard conversations with them, because they know it's coming from a place of care. And so first and foremost, as a leader, creating that environment, an environment that is safe. So creating a trauma-safe workspace. And then when you have to have those conversations with people, actually try and take the time to get to know the person first, so that you know how to broach the conversation with them, so that okay, I'm dealing with Nono here, and she would probably prefer if I just got straight to the point, and it doesn't mean I say it in a harsh, critical way, but I don't sit down and faff about and be like, oh, how's your day, Nono? Yeah, you look great, so tell me a little bit about life. Like, no, like, she needs me to get to the point, and I'm going to get there, and I'm going to get there with kindness. I'm going to get there, with compassion and showing her that I care, but I'm going to get straight to the point. So it's hard for me to say, okay, how should someone navigate that conversation? Because every person is unique. And if you can understand your people, you're better equipped to have those conversations with them. And honestly, I think it's something that I'll probably have to sit down with someone and have like a long conversation to be like, okay, this is how you might want to approach this particular individual or that particular individual when it comes to addressing their needs. But one thing I will say that I think is just critical for us, especially in the Southern African context, in Sub-Saharan Africa, is let's start to normalize conversations around these things. Because like I said, I guarantee all of us have our trauma stories, and all of us have experienced stuff that has impacted us in ways that have been long lasting, and we've been unable to shake. And we know that, man, if I could just kind of shake this thing, I would be better. Or maybe we've even become so used to living with it, we don't even know how to shake it or where to begin. But all of us have a trauma story. So let's talk about it. Let's normalize it so that when we do have to have those conversations with people, it doesn't feel like you're crazy. It feels like this is just a part of our story as human beings in the world that we live in, that we're going to be impacted and affected by things, and we should be okay with having conversations around them, so that we can help one another out and we can be the better versions of ourselves.
Yeah, so I just want to segue quickly into personality
Yeah.
tests and personality types,
Yeah.
because you mentioned that it's quite important for us to understand who we're dealing with. Like, if you're talking to a Nono, you're probably not waffling on about your whole life story. We're just getting to the point and we're moving on. And not to say that I don't talk to people, guys, I do. No, like at the end of this, people are going to be like, no, it doesn't like to talk. No, I can chat. But really, around the personality types, in your experience, when you're working around, first, maybe let's talk about the different categorizations of personality types, and then which ones you have found most insightful.
Yeah. So I think there's really two broad categories of personality types. There's personality types which are used just to determine personality traits, preferences, and are used by the general public, and would utilize something called a self-report inventory. So this is usually where you get questions like, how would you respond if you were at a party and the music died down, and then you kind of self-evaluate and self-assess. And then based on your responses, it gives you an idea of what your personality type or traits might be. So that would be one category of assessments that are out there. And within that category, there's so many different personality types. So this is assessments, I mean. So this is where you would find your things like the Myers-Briggs, the 16PF, the Big Five, the Enneagram, the DISC, all of those things would be kind of under those categories. I think Jordan Peterson even came up with a new personality assessment recently. So I'm assuming his would probably fall into that category as well. And then you also have other personality assessments which are used in a more clinical setting. And these are used to determine pathology. And I wanted to be clear as well that usually the assessments that are used, just the general personality assessments that utilize self-report, tend to be used and based. So when we're talking about the validation process or the process of making sure that these assessments are actually reliable, they're based on normal human behavior. So again, that brings in the question of personality types or personality assessments dealing with traumatized individuals, because traumatized individuals necessarily in their quote unquote normal state. So they deal with normal behavior. So what they're assessing is normal behavior to identify personality type. And then in the clinical setting, we'll use other instruments which are more projective, to try and find out if there's any pathology. So if there's any personality disorders that someone is living with. And then so those instruments are a little bit different. Some of them are self-report. A lot of them you require a clinician to work alongside with you to be able to get the results and to be able to give you an accurate understanding of what might be going on. And this might include things like the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, which is a doozy of an assessment, or things like, I think we've all at some point heard of, when we think of psychologists, we think of the Rorschach, which is that ink blot test. That's a projective personality test. So yeah, those are the two major classifications of personality assessments that are out there. So the general population would be using just your MBTIs and all of those to determine their personality preferences and traits. And then you also have the clinical side as well.
You touched upon the validity of the personality test. So how do we then make sure that they're reliable and valid? And is there any room to I guess, apply our cultural and social influences when we're looking at someone's personality, whether it's self-administered or whether it's with a practitioner, whether it's clinical, etc.?
Yeah. So I guess the two parts to that question, and I'll answer them separately. But so the first part on, I guess, validity and reliability, how can you tell if an assessment is valid or reliable? Usually you can find this information if you're diligent enough in your research around the personality instrument that you're looking to use to see, has this tool been tested on broad demographics? Are there scholarly articles that actually tell you that this is a research-based instrument and is not just, someone being like, let me tell you what your sign is, how that, how it affects your personality or whatever else it is. But is there actually evidence out there? If you research, are you able to find that this is actually a tool that has been tested and tried and proven to measure what it's saying that it's going to measure? And then when you talk about like the cultural contexts that we exist in, and how do we make sure that the validity and the reliability of these assessments translates culturally, I think this is where it's important to even just have the input of someone who understands clinical assessments and understands how they work with the background of a variety of different cultures and demographics, so that if an instrument has not been utilized in a particular context and you're wanting to utilize it in that particular context, guidance can be given as to A, whether it's even a good instrument to use in that context, or B, how to go about doing that if it could be translated or utilized in a different cultural context. But yeah, I think it's so important for us to be aware that a lot of these instruments, especially for us in sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of these instruments have been developed in more Anglo-Saxon regions of the world. And so culturally, there's a very big difference between there and here. So you might even find some questions which, culturally speaking, might have various or different implications. So having an understanding of that, and even being, I guess, excited or proactive about making them culturally relevant, I think is definitely something to be considered and to look into. But yeah, I think for now, I guess based on what is out there and looking at culture, it would be about doing due diligence and just making sure that you're working with people who understand these instruments and understand the impact that it might have on culture in order to be able to utilize them effectively if you are going to utilize them. And that being said, there are also a lot of tools that have come out of sub-Saharan Africa that I think, for us culturally speaking, we can say, yes, this speaks to our culture. It speaks to who we are. I know there's Zanga African Metrics. They do some leadership profiles for individuals, and that's out of sub-Saharan Africa. And also there's some companies in South Africa that have developed some tools. I know there's JVR. They do a lot of psychometrics that are developed out of the African context. So do due diligence, find what works and what would work best for the context. And where there is nothing, hey, why not be the first person to create the thing that will make the difference? But yeah.
Awesome. And you mentioned a lot about you understanding the different types of personality types, working with the trained professional to make sure that, you're getting the best value for what you're putting in. So in short, we're not looking at personality types as a horoscope. If you are a Sagittarius and the moon is halfway in the sky, or I don't know,
or I don't know. It'll be bad for you. I don't know.
Do not go to work today. Stay home. So let's move from thinking about it as, okay, I'm a leader, I'm managing a team, to I'm an individual managing myself. How do I understand that I actually have trauma? Because you mentioned that, some people, it's like, why does this bother me? Because this is a small T. And then you're going into a personality test because you're trying to understand yourself better. What can you actually do? Or is it just one of those things that someone else has to go, you need to go talk to somebody? How do you navigate that?
Yeah. So I think I'd like to think, and I think experience has also shown me in the past that most people, and again, I'll say most because not everyone, because some people can be deep in denial and not really willing to recognize what might be going on with them. But I think most people know when something is just not right with them. And they might not be able to label it or identify it or say, oh, I think this is trauma, but they'll know that something is not okay. So I would say if you feel like, there's this thing in your life that has a hold on you and that impacts your sleep, maybe it just pops into your dreams frequently every so often, or it's stuff you're constantly thinking about, or it's stuff that makes you really nervous, like just hearing about this thing or hearing about it somewhere else or in someone else's life just makes you really nervous and you don't know why. If you have things like that, it might be worth pursuing some kind of psychological help to determine whether you might be navigating trauma and you might be dealing with it. But again, like I said before, I think so often we can even become used to existing with our trauma or even living with things which are not healthy for us. And because we've lived with it maybe even our whole lives, we don't know any different. How do I know that, what I'm doing is unhealthy if I've done it my whole life? Unless someone says, that thing might not be great. So then again, yes, even having people in your life who can speak truth to you in that way, who can actually say, yeah, maybe it would be a good idea for you to go and, chat with someone or, have an assessment done, is helpful. So I think it can be identified by yourself as an individual. Yes, if you introspect and allow yourself to go on that oftentimes very hard journey of self-leadership. Because Nono, when you talk about leadership, if it doesn't start here, and if you're not willing to go to the hard places here, the places for you which are uncomfortable and difficult, it's going to be so hard for you to go to those hard places as a leader when you're leading other people. So being able to just kind of navigate those hard spaces for you, and then also asking input of others. Do you think that it's normal that I, throw plates at people every time they say cardfish? Like they'll be like, no, that's not
the answer is you need help.
You might need to talk to someone about that. Where's that coming from? So yes, I think it can be kind of both ends, and having people who, like I said, will speak to you and will actually be honest with you and tell you that they're worried about something or not. But yeah. Does that answer your
It does. It really does, Suwilo. Like, I've enjoyed this conversation. I think that we could probably go into certain parts of the conversation even deeper. But I would like you to share maybe where we could find a little bit more information about you if we wanted to engage in your services.
Yeah, sure. So our information is online. You can visit our website, which I'm not sure if Nono, I think Nono, you'll be able to kind of put that out there. So you can visit our website. There's contact information there for our email, our phone. You're always welcome to reach out to us at Elevate. We love providing guidance to help people know what next steps they might need to take, whether that's with us or somewhere else. Like, we just love being able to provide guidance. So feel free to reach out and ask us about personality assessments, ask us more about trauma. We would love to be able to journey with people. So our information's on our website. So we've got Instagram, we've got Facebook, we've got LinkedIn. Yeah.
Amazing. I will put all those links in the description. And thank you, Suwilo, for a lovely conversation. See you next time. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share as we embark on our mission to impact 1 million African lives by 2026.